So I haven't met a lot of you, but I want to say huge thanks for showing up to listening to me talk about this. So I'm going to just give a quick little couple of slides and then move into the actual software itself. So yeah, I'll just kick off with that. So the title of this slide is called iAm, and this is just because that is the name I gave this prototype software that I've been working on for about 5 years. The first person experience data model and hopefully one day research platform. So yeah, let's get into it. So this is just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about this much broader vision that does not exist right now, but hopefully there are people interested in being a part of maybe making this real at some point. Then I'm going to talk about this data model, which is, I think, the most important part of this for storing first-person experience and specifically real-time first-person experience. Then I'm going to kind of talk about what are all the things that this data model should be accounting for that exists in the world of research today. And why should something like this exist? Yeah. All right. So grand vision, what on earth am I talking about? So we all have direct experience. We all experience things directly. And what I am super interested in is finding ways and techniques for actually being able to report on first-person real-time experience. So not retrospective, what I thought a week ago, how I felt about the last 2 weeks, more like what's arising on its own right now. For everybody right now, first-person experience is visual imagery of someone that you've probably never seen before talking about, this lecture. But I'm super interested in is how can you store that information in a meaningful way that it can be analyzed. Visual is kind of hard, but it can totally be done. So the vision is that at some point in the future, we have a research discipline that is focused on developing a technical language, reporting techniques and standards for how we could actually measure first-person experience. I believe phenomenology is probably the discipline to do this. I came into this prior to even knowing what phenomenology was, so I've gotten a little bit smarter over the last 2 months, but I've still got a bit more work to do. So that's the grand vision. On top of that, having some sort of standardized data model for actually how you structure first-person experience. The reason we want to standardize this is so that a researcher in, say, Iceland and someone in Brazil and someone in China can all use this exact same data model to collect or conduct research on whatever first-person experience they're interested in. And that data model will be universal between all those different disciplines. On top of this data model, some sort of consortium that's actually focused on maintaining the data model, proposing changes to it, and voting on those said changes. So I come from an engineering background, so I think it's called the World Wide Web Consortium, or WC3. They're responsible for all of the standards that exist on the web today. And HTML1, if you remember in the 90s, looked very different than the web applications that we have today. And that was all because these consortiums, continue to evolve the standards for that model. And that's why we have pretty sweet internet. So proposing something like that, but for maintaining a model of first-person experience that can improve over time as our knowledge and understanding evolves. And then lastly, and this is what my major dream is, having a software platform that implements this data model that allows us to conduct research into first-person experience. So let's talk about the model. So everything within this bubble that my mouse is circling around, this is exactly as this is the model I'm using today, right? So what I mean by that is that all the information that I collect is stored in a graph. So I'm going to quickly talk about these individual nodes. So right here, we have this kind of dark red, brown kind of node observer. So that is you, me, that is anyone that is actually the person reporting on their experience as it's happening. Then this black node, which is a session. A session is defined as just one unique period of time where someone is reporting on what's arising in their experience. And then we have relationships from the session to what's actually reported. So sense phenomena is just the word I use, but it's an arbitrary word for, you could use qualia, and that is just any arbitrary definition of direct experience that we want to look at. Maybe that's thought, maybe that's emotion, maybe that's, frisson, which is the bubbly, tingly feeling that people experience in their body. It could be anything. It can be totally arbitrary, but the goal is we've got some way to be able to measure all these things, you could say uniformly. Then to the left, we've got user input. So what are the different ways that we can actually report on our experience? Keyboard, touchscreen, voice, we talked in the last meeting about, a huge meditation hall full, 60 people using PlayStation 5 controllers to report on what's happening in the moment. So really ensuring that the model supports a wide variety of input modalities. Then on the other side, we've got biosignals. So this is your typical fMRI, EEG, any sort of biometric, signal that can be measured in time. That would be incredible to be able to map with this model, because then you have the first person subjective experience, and you also have the objective physiological data. And I can only imagine the crazy kinds of things you'd be able to do if you can correlate real-time first-person experience and EEG data, and the questions you could potentially ask, I think are worth exploring. Yeah. And then lastly, you have survey data. So, most of psychology uses surveys for many different things. It's how we, in some cases, diagnose certain mental disorders. So if you can correlate then the survey data with first person, real-time reporting, then you have the ability to say, these types of changes were reported in their first person experience over time as their, depression scores went down, between month 1 and month 3. So this is a fairly simplified model, but ultimately you can see it's a graph, and I think that's really the way to store this information, because everything can be highly related and connected, and you can ask really complicated questions because of that. Okay, and then I'm not going to go over all of this, but what are the things that this model should be accounting for, right? Well, a lot of things. Ideally, in a perfect world, it should really be able to encompass a majority of what experiences we have, such as meditative, psychedelic, or psychoactive. So SSRIs for depression. I don't know, some paper came out recently about how the serotonin theory of depression is probably not right. But people are still taking SSRIs and reporting a higher than placebo for positive effects. So maybe there's some phenomenological experiences, or SSRIs affect your experience in some way that is beneficial towards reducing depression symptoms, and maybe there's a way of measuring that. And then quite a bunch of other ones, scientific surveys, how do we incorporate that into the model? Experience sampling method, real-time first-person experiencing, et cetera, et cetera. So really just, these are things to consider. And then lastly, why should it be made? because I don't believe at this moment, and someone tell me if I'm wrong, that there exists some sort of standardized data model for reporting on first-person experience. If it does exist, point me to it. And I'm happy to start helping them continue to expand that idea. But if it doesn't exist, it probably, I think, should exist. So I've just given you kind of the much more broad, grand vision, 10, 20, 30 years down the road. Where are we today, or where am I today? So I've been working on this software that I've named iAm. And it is focused on how you could actually report on your experience in real time as it's happening. And this is available to anybody. I'm not going to go through how you set it up. I've got videos on YouTube for that, and it would take maybe a little bit of time, but suffice to say, you can set this up on your own. All data is stored on your computer, and I want to really foot stomp that. I do not have access to it. The only people that have access to that data is whoever has access to the computer that you're collecting the data through. So just know I have, and no one has access to it, and I want to foot stomp that because I've been collecting my data for 2 years. And I don't really feel like I want to share every single thought that I've had, or at least not at this moment. So yeah, I think it's important to have some sort of privacy in place there. Okay, so this is the application that you're seeing right here. And there's really only 2 buttons on it. The red one, these 2 red ones right here. This one right here is your actual tracking. So I have 3 different trackers right now. Thought tracking, emotion tracking, and hedonic. Thought tracking is literally as verbal content arises, you just write it down and hit enter. You set a timer for 30 minutes, or excuse me, 5 minutes. You can do longer if you want, but you don't have to. So that's thought tracking. Emotion tracking is, at this particular moment, it is I think happy, sad, fear, anger, and craving. So observing in your first person experience as those dimensions of emotional experience are arising. And there's keys associated with each one so that you can, be reporting happy and anger at the same time. And really, this is more of an exploration. Do we experience one emotion at the same time? Does it appear that we experience multiple co-occurring? This platform isn't necessarily to give you the answer or to say this is how it is. It's like, how is it? And let's all try to use it and have more conversations about this so that maybe we can tease apart the enduring qualities of first-person experience. And then lastly, hedonic tracking, and that's just like neutral, positive, or negative, right? So and that's just your hedonic experience in this moment. So as that's changing, you would just change between neutral, positive, and negative. Pretty simple. So I'm going to give a quick demo of thought tracking. So this interface right here basically lets you add kind of categorical information to what you're trying to track. I've got passive flow, which is the one I typically use. Passive flow is just for me to identify that this session, I'm just going to be in a state of open awareness, observing what arises and reporting on it. I'm not going to create my own intentional thoughts. I'm just reporting on what happens without my will involved. And then there's quite a few other ones like CBT, but those aren't necessarily relevant. Just for context, when I do CBT, I will create intentional thoughts and I will use this software while I do it just because I want to look at the data afterwards. You could think that if you were to record while you do CBT, maybe you'd start to actually see changes in your mental activity over time. These are the kinds of questions I'd really love answers to. So I'm going to stick with passive flow. I'm just going to set a timer for let's say 30 seconds. And then once you click begin tracker, it's going to put you into an interface where you literally just type in what's arising as it's happening. And yeah, that's it. So I'm going to just sit here. You can see there's an autocomplete. So thoughts that you've already mentioned, you can quickly tab to them. You know, so yeah, so I'm just kind of reporting on what just happens to be popping up in my head as it's happening. And then you can see I've added, there's a hedonic affect, and I've actually tagged this as it occurred. So right now the keys 1, 2, and 3 can tag a particular experience as positive, negative, or neutral. And this is just kind of adding an extra layer of data onto whatever that thing is you're interested in reporting. So I'm going to hit submit. Okay, so that is that data. So I'm going to quickly jump into the data visualization side. So we've got 2 ways of visualizing our data. One is through this thought tracker time series. So what this does is it takes each individual session of reported information and it plots it on a timeline and runs, some fairly basic, analytics against it, such as, average thoughts per minute, right? So this is kind of average thoughts per minute, and I think total count are kind of the main ones. Average thoughts per minute is just averaging out how many thoughts you had divided by, the amount of time you did it, right? So this gives you the ability to kind of see changes in mental activity over time. Obviously, I'm taking a 5-minute snapshot, or excuse me, I should say, typically when I do this, I do it in 5-minute increments. So I'm getting a 5-minute snapshot of a much bigger day. So this is another question of how accurate is that? How reflective of your whole day is that particular snapshot? And I only have my own experience to go off, so I can't speak for anyone, but I can say it's surprisingly reflective. But I also have some OCD kind of level issues, so it would make sense maybe that for me, it would be a little bit more consistent. Then you have other data points such as like existing thought count versus new thought count. So when you do a session, is it something you've already reported before, or is it something totally new that's never been reported into the system? Then there's other metrics such as, say, average time between thoughts. So this is the average amount of space between one thought being reported and the next one arising. So, you could assume that, you're super enlightened, 60, 80-year-old monk. Like, you hope that it's just none. It's just, there's just one huge gap because they never reported anything. But what I'm interested in is, hey, maybe we can actually measure this, right? So maybe there is no difference between this person that says that, they're enlightened and maybe they have more thoughts than us. Like, who really knows? There's no, as far as I understand it, there's no data to really answer those types of questions. And what I hope is that something like this could potentially give us more insight into that. All right, so this is, just a time series plot. You can change the dates of it. So if I want to see like from July all the way to now, I can update the graph. You can see that there's a huge spike here. This is because I changed some of my data and I didn't do it correctly. So don't mind that. But once again, you can see here, and we'll go with, let's see, average thoughts per minute, because that's a pretty good one. You can see the changes in the amount of thoughts, or the average amount of thoughts per minute that is reported. And yeah, it looks a little all over the place. So obviously a lot of research probably still needs to be done. So that's the time series. The next thing is something called Neo-Dash. So ignore this one. This is not very functional, so it's not too worth talking about right now. But there's another one called Neo-Dash. If you click on it, it will take you, might as well click on it right here. So it takes you to this dashboard visualizer. So this is a tool for visualizing the data stored in Neo4j. So that is the graph database that's storing this model right now. Technically, it can be any graph database, but this is what I'm using right now. And it's super helpful because it allows you to write queries directly into the database and build visualizations off of those. So when you sign up for the application, you will be taken to this dashboard right here. So I have 3 dashboards at the moment. I'm actually using my real data. I've so you're going to see a lot of my mind, I've created 3 different tabs. One is for monthly reporting, weekly, and then top 100 keywords. And I'll explain all of these. So monthly reporting is collecting all of the data that I've reported using passive flow tracking, and it plots out, some metrics on that said data. So for October, right here, this shows the top 10 most frequently reported thoughts. So for whatever reason, my mind tends to say patients know a lot, right? And this is something I can absolutely say is 100% accurate. It's the most common thing my mind tends to report. And what I can also say is it wasn't always like this. It just suddenly started happening in April, and it is like literally just shot to the #1 thing my mind, for whatever reason, repeats. I don't know why, but it does that. This column right here breaks down, or this view breaks down hedonic reporting. So of all of the thoughts I've reported, what did I tag those as? For October, neutral is the #1 thing I'm reporting. Positive is the second, negative is least, and then I forgot to report it right here. And then on the right, this very last one, this is describing the top 10 negatively tagged thoughts, right? So within this subsection right here, how many of these, within this subsection right here, what were those thoughts? And it's listed right here. You can see some things are redacted because that's the stuff I don't necessarily feel like sharing. Yeah, so these just kind of give you a view of, hey, what are the most frequently negative thoughts that your mind is producing on its own? And you can see breakdowns for each month. Right now, it just goes back 6 months. This is just because the more months you add, the longer the browser takes to load the page because there's more data to visualize. But yeah, this is a breakdown of it over the last few months. And then weekly reporting gives you a smaller snapshot. So this is just weekly reporting of what's arising, what content that is. And obviously, the more you do this, I would say the more accurate your data would be, because the more amount of time you report, I don't know, there's some math involved, I'm assuming, but the more, if you did this 24 hours a day, then you'd have a perfect snapshot of what your mind is like for that day. Assuming you don't do that, there's some amount of, ambiguity. But I'm sure you're all aware of that. So yeah, this is just weekly reporting of the exact same thing. And then what I actually am really the most interested in right now is monthly top 100 keywords. So what this actually does is it takes every single thought for that month and it splits out each individual word, and then it does a word count of that, right? So if this had been like 8 months ago, and I'll go down to the lowest one I can, you can see iAm is the #1 reported thought or word that arises when I do this. Before that, or after that is I. So I is #1. If I were to show my data prior to like 8 months ago, I is always #1. It's the #1 thought or #1 word that pops up in my own mind. And coincidentally, it just recently started to be patience. That's just what my data tells me. So if you're interested in kind of getting a better understanding of what's happening in your own experience, this is a good way to do it. So that pretty much actually is it. So this is available if anyone is interested in using it. There is a Discord server where people that are interested in this kind of topic have coalesced. And I would absolutely love anybody that's interested in getting involved with this and helping to develop this. I would absolutely love that. And please join us on the Discord. But with that said, thank you everybody for taking your time to listen to this. And I hope I have not bored everyone to tears.
No, that was awesome. Especially after having seen the first version and then this one. Kick ass. It's great. I don't know whether we should ask if anyone has any questions before we stop recording in case there's something there that's worth including.
Yeah.
We should just kill the recording now. Yeah, we're gonna do okay, let's try to do questions. So
let's keep it short because I've been wanting to hear Sean's presentation for a while now. So but yeah, does anyone have anything? Oh, this is perfect.
If nobody does, that's fine. We'll just edit out this part and it'll end. Or maybe when I said it was kick ass, I don't know. All right. Let's
what's the number one insight you got from your data? I have certain addictions I wouldn't have acknowledged previously. I think that's probably one of them, if not the number one. And I think just that thoughts are arising all the time, completely out of my control. And to think that there's some volitional I that's doing all the thinking is becoming less and less likely, especially when you see certain things start to trigger your mind and like you can really, like I'm not doing any thinking, but the thinking content is dramatically different because, likely this event occurred. So it definitely, I originally built this as kind of like a self-knowledge tool. It's just that over time, I was like, this is very interesting, the data that's coming out of this. So I wonder how we could analyze that in large scales.
I have a quick question. No.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it was great listening to it. It's very impressive, really. I was wondering, did you think combining this with like natural language processing or something like this so that the report can be verbal instead of written? I think it can be powerful, right?
Yes. So this kind of circles back to the slides I had given, and that's all input devices, right? Right now it's a keyboard, but forward thinking, like how do we do voice recognition? How do we, anything that can be served as an input device, like how do we incorporate that to make it as easy as possible for people to be able to report this? For me, I like typing. I'm a very fast typer. And there are situations where I probably don't want to say out loud what is popping up in my head. So for me, typing is preferable.
I see.
Sweet. Well, thank you once again, everybody. And Sean, the floor is yours.